Ryerson Career and Co-op Center, give you a bit of background on what we do, how we can support you, why we're having this conversation, and how we'll follow up with this. So firstly, the Ryerson Career and Co-op Center obviously services the students of the Ryerson community. We work with students from across all faculties. And the reason that we're having this conversation is that we created Investing in Inclusion really to be a tool for us to create safer, more inclusive spaces for our students. As students were graduating, we were hearing more and more that students didn't feel safe in spaces, or things were being said to them, or they were not being offered opportunities based on their identity. And so we thought maybe there's an opportunity here for us to help educate our employer partners and how they support individuals from equity-seeking groups. Specifically with this conversation, we were definitely having our students come over to us and say, what are you doing about this? How are you helping employers address anti-Black racism? And on the flip side, we had a few of our employers come to us and say, how do we fix this? How do we address it? What can we do? So we decided that it was really important for us to have this discussion here today. We're not experts, but we definitely have some wonderful people who have done some fantastic work in this area. I really encourage you to consider or listen to what they're saying. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback. If anyone has their microphone on, if you don't mind just muting it, that'd be wonderful. So Ryerson's mandate, or we have a really big mandate around diversity and inclusion, and it's really important for us to make sure that that is embedded in all the programming that we have and all that we do. And so with that in mind, we've developed a consultancy that helps us help our employer partners. So we will come out and speak with you if you need support around training, around diversity and inclusion, whether it's pride training or looking at different sort of inclusion practices that you might need support in. That's something that we can definitely work with you on and connect you with the right resources if you need it. So we really want to encourage you after today, if you need support or want to have further discussions around what inclusion looks like at your organization and how we can support you, please do reach out and we'd be happy to support you in any way that we can. I also want to highlight that after today's conversation, we'll be sending you a list of resources that we've compiled to help you further your learning personally, but also as an organization. So there will be a document that will include things like books that you can read, articles, webinars, movies, all kinds of things that you can access just to further your learning and better your understanding around this particular conversation itself. So you can look out for that after today. Some considerations. So to get the most out of this webinar, we ask you to please make sure your mics are muted. As well, at the top of your screen, you'll see that there's an option for speaker view. So what that will do is, because we're on Zoom Meet, you're probably seeing a grid on your screen right now, but if you click on the speaker option, what it will do is make sure that you're seeing the speaker that's talking. I think we have over 100 people on the call right now. So the speaker option will make sure that you're able to view the person that is speaking at the moment versus seeing a grid of people or blank screens. In terms of the question period, we'll ask you to keep your microphones muted during the question period, but rather type your questions into the chat box on the side, and we'll be taking questions via the chat box. And then finally, our social contract. So we want to make sure that this conversation is held in the most respectful way. These are very sensitive and personal conversations, and we ask that you please respect and appreciate that everyone's bringing a personal experience. So as you're asking questions, or maybe you have or would like to challenge an idea, please do that in the most respectful way possible to allow this conversation to be open and inclusive to all people. And with that, we're going to get started. So I wanted to firstly introduce my colleague, Krista Mark, who comes from our Office of Equity, Community and Inclusion here at Ryerson. Crystal is just going to address us with a few remarks and also do our land acknowledgement before we get started. So with that, I will throw it over to Crystal.
Good morning, JP. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. What a great audience. I would like to do just a short introduction of myself, but before I do that, it is important that we take time to do a land acknowledgement. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississauga, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat people that bound them to share the territory and protect the lands. Subsequent indigenous nations, people, Europeans, settlers, non-settlers, and newcomers have been invited to this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. In so gathering today to discuss anti-Black racism in the workplace, investing in inclusion, we must also acknowledge the continued marginalization of both Black and Indigenous persons and people of color from places of sustainable employment. Positions of influence, power, and access to workspaces that are inclusive and responsive. It is our duty to continue in solidarity for Indigenous and Black self-determination and solidarity within the context of Turtle Island. Chi So, to introduce myself, my name is Crystal Mark. I am the Education and Awareness Consultant for Office of Vice President, Community and Equity, and Community Inclusion. It's a big mouthful, so let me try it one more time. I am the Education and Awareness Consultant for Office of Vice President, Equity and Community Inclusion. Um, which means my work focuses on providing facilitations, consultations, and education on topics of equity and inclusion, including racism, indigeneity, feminist thought, accessibility, and queer identity and access, just to name a few. In today's discussion, while we'll be distilling around anti-Black racism and discussing its inherent existence and its byproduct, erasure, in the context of Canada as a nation, but also within the employment sector, it's through these discussions that we have opportunity to advance our skill and understanding to develop intentional and inclusive practices and environments that allow Black Canadians and their colleagues to thrive. I just want to read a little piece about a formal definition of anti-Black racism and then move into a few of my own notes. There are various types of anti-Black racism and bias, which are definitely damaging to individuals and impact their participation in the community at large. And when I say community, I'm referring also to various communities, including that of the workplace. The experience of racism encountered by participants is largely based on being Black by people who are not Black. Anti-Black racism as a practice is one where Black people are singled out based on skin color, and are treated differently and often disadvantageously in environments such as universities and workplaces. Anti-Black racism is experienced as systemic exclusion of Black people, making Black people feel things like feeling out of place, diminishing their ideas, excluding specific references to them, producing and representation across their meaning, and distorting ideas and images of them. Experience also Experience of this also includes a lack of representation among all areas of the institutions, and the use of racist language or hostility, and a range of other modes and practices that are both subtle and overt that send a message that Black people are neither a priority or fully welcome in the same level that others are. Some of these conditions can combine and create further aspects of exclusion when it comes to intersectional identity. Racism in general is a system of social, economic, and cultural oppression, exclusion, and in particular, erasure that creates both visible and invisible hierarchies between people who are raced and those who are not. Anti-Black racism is the specific practice of violence, indifference, punitive or exclusionary treatment of those born of African descent. Anti-Black racism is pervasive in all aspects of society as it is inextricable from the building and creation of our North American nation states, which means to change it, to dismantle it, we must first acknowledge it, which is part of what we're doing here today. Canadianism has a polite apartheid that seeks to invisibilize these racialized hierarchies, and it exists to funnel into workplaces of all industry and purpose, meaning none of us are exempt. From discrimination in employment practices and hiring to developing and maintaining methods of operation that exclude or fail to plan for anything other than the mainstream, which often means non-racialized corporate culture, anti-Black racism is continued and maintained. Black people not only have to live with this reality, but they have to sustain livelihoods, raise and prepare future generations to live in it and for it. This, this is depleting of our resources, our humanity, and creativity. And it impedes the very notion of progress. Should Black identified people be freer to bring their best selves to the workplace and have that valued, included, understood, and empathized, we could be on the cusp of greatness in our civilization. So what do? Well, we start with conversations like these. We humble ourselves enough to learn new knowledge, take notes, and be brave in our courageous conversations. We begin to retire ideas like fit and culture when looking for candidates, as we begin to understand that these two have worked to discriminate and erase the face and voice of Black folks. We actively choose to recognize anti-Black racism as distinct and specific type of erasure within the context of a Canadian multicultural mosaic narrative. We begin to look around, ask questions, and actively take stock in our values. We show up, we learn and contribute, and we ask questions even when it makes us uncomfortable. Anti-Black racism, while it targets and affects Black people, is not alone our role to fix. It indeed belongs to every person committed to a just and equitable world. We have had this conversation many times before. Previously, it's been had in the civil rights movement, throughout history, at kitchen tables, and in segregated spaces. What is different now is the following. One, Black people are not alone in this struggle and will not shoulder the weight of this catalyst for change. Two, these conversations are now happening in our boardrooms and on our news and at the highest echelons of the nation's conscience. And three, the crossroads of our COVID pandemic society has ensured that this time the world simply could not look away. So today, we welcome you to a conversation that is ripe for reflection, examination, and truth-telling change. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Crystal. Really appreciate those remarks. And I think it really frames this conversation so well. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists here today. We have a really fantastic group of people who we've gathered, who have expertise in supporting organizations and talking about anti-Black racism in the workplace. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oops, that's not it. Apologies, I'm having some technical difficulties. There it is. There it is. So first off, we have Andrea Barrett, who's from the Black Chamber of Commerce. We have Aziz Garuba from the Canadian Association of Urban Professionals. We have Carolyn Kagapan Stout from KPMG's Social Impact Group. And we have Chris Thompson from the Federation of Black Canadians. And so what I'm going to do is actually ask our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves before we jump into this conversation. Why don't we start with Chris?
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Thompson. Glad to be here. I'm with the Federation of Black Canadians. I'm the vice chair. The Federation of Black Canadians is a non-for-profit organization driven by organizations across the country. We look to advance on social, economic, political, and cultural interests of Canadians of African descent. Myself, I do a lot of the governance and operations with the organization. I also work with a daytime with an organization called the United Way of Greater Toronto. I work a lot in the community support department, and I'm a community advanced supporter. And basically, I work to help ethnic-based groups to kind of grow, bring awareness to issues in the community, bring it to United Way, and then support and the awareness going back out to other departments and levels of government. Part that I do have background in HR with the organization, working in C-suite, and then I run my own charity called Skills for Life. Frontlines work with youth, vulnerable youth, dealing with everything from soft skills development and financial literacy and self-esteem building. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Andrea.
Thanks, Jean-Pierre. Hi, everybody. Hello, Ryerson. My name is Andrea Barrett. I'm the president of the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce, and I'm also the CEO of the Diversity Agency. So we're a speakers bureau, and we support and represent diverse voices, and we also teach unconscious bias and anti-Black racism training. As the president of the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce, our goal, our mission, and our mandate is to grow entrepreneurship in the Black community right across Canada. Really happy to be here for this conversation.
Thanks so much, Andrea. Aziz.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aziz Garuba. I'm the current chair of the Corporate Advisory Board for the Canadian Association of Urban Financial Professionals. I was also a recent past president of the organization, and we focus primarily on advancing Black professionals on Bay Street, with a particular focus on the financial services sector, including getting more Black folks into financial services organizations, as well as getting more Black people, up the ranks through to leadership role. Outside of that, I'm currently a director of cost transformation within RBC Capital Markets. Spent a lot of time in the financial services space, and within these groups, I've also championed a lot of diversity and inclusion agendas, including sitting on the RBC CFO Diversity and Inclusion Council, the Leadership Council, and of course pushing for more help and support for the Black professionals within the organization. So I'm very happy to be a part of this conversation.
Thanks so much, Aziz. And finally, we have Carolyn, who's joining us from KPMG.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline Kagampan-Stout. I'm National Associate Director of KPMG Social Impact. KPMG is a professional services firm. Social Impact is basically our corporate social responsibility arm, and it's a complementary department to our inclusion and diversity group at KPMG. We align our strategy to the UN Sustainable Development Goals with respect to social impact, and one of our focus areas is reduce inequalities. So I'm really so obviously, like, we're working on an anti-Black strategy at the firm, and I can talk to you a little bit about that. But today I'm also bringing the voice of an ally, a humble but passionate and loud one. So I'm an ally with our Black Professionals Network, as well as our Women's Network and our Pride Network. And I consider myself an anti-racist. In my free time, I mentor with Accelerator Future, which is an early career accelerator for BIPOC women in business and STEM. I used to live in the States, have many Black friends and family members, and I really just want to use my voice and my skills to fight against anti-Black racism, and really honored to be part of this panel today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. So happy to have such a wealth of experience and knowledge join us here today. To jump right into our conversation, Chris and Angie, I'm going to direct this question to you both. Anti-Black racism can take many forms in a workplace, and it's sometimes quite difficult to identify. What do you think anti-Black racism looks like in a workplace?
I can start. I think I would agree. It takes many forms, and not everyone can recognize it. So if you're, it really all depends on the skin that you're in. So there are experiences that I face on a regular basis, or colleagues who look like me face that are other colleagues who aren't Black won't experience or face. Sometimes people asking you simple things like, oh, what floor are you going to? Knowing that, there's a certain floor where certain executives are supposed to be, or certain level of employed people are supposed to be. So asking questions like that, I think, can affect it. Also, this is a common thing I hear a lot, is when people say, after you do a presentation or a training or a workshop, wow, you're really articulate, implying that you're not used to hearing people speak or deliver information or content in this manner. Is it something that you would say to everyone, or you are really articulate for a Black person or a Black woman? So those are some of the examples and experiences that I've experienced.
Thank you, Andrea. And I agree. Starting off with that, I think some background noise. Maybe you have to go on mute. All right, that might help. Just to continue off of that. So basically referring to a lot of microaggressions, which is a commonplace thing that happens in the workplace a lot now, in terms of questions being asked or things being said that can come off as hurtful or derogatory, or kind of in the wrong place, asking questions that, where are you from, and all of these things or other things. So that is a commonplace. Other things that is really present in the workplace, or happens a lot, even from what I see, is lack of representation from leadership levels. So that can be from managerial to C-suite to the board. The board also be looked at. But then there's also the flip side of it, is over-representation within lower paid positions or entry. That is another thing that we see a lot of times too, where it's over-representation. We actually ask businesses, organizations to just take a reflection and look, how's that come to be? What are the policies in place, or how's the hiring policies, or even things you go to review through the year, and just notice where people are falling, who's being going up, who's not. And sometimes you have staff which is just going across. They're not really moving up, but they're changing titles, but they're really not moving higher in status or influence within the organization. A couple others that we see is a lack of opportunity, like I said, opportunity for upward movement, but also lack of equity in the principles or in the culture. So basically, when you're reading policies or having staff discussions, and you need to get to knowing who the people are. People actually businesses often talk about knowing their staff and their culture and who's there. But how do you really go into that? And what does it mean for a Black person coming to that work and being worried about, often code switching, if people haven't heard about that, or, having to step on eggshells in terms of how we present ourselves or what we do, just to fit this kind of culture that is kind of put on us to act a certain way. So we're battling to be ourselves and also do our work, but then also to fit into a culture that has been kind of in place on us that may take away from our ability to do our work. So that's just a couple of things to share.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's really important to note that often when companies are reporting their stats, looking at where those individuals are sitting in an organization is really important to address, right? Are they moving up? Are they being given opportunities to grow in the organization? That's super, super important. Right now, many people in many companies want to take action, make impact. Chris and Caroline, what do you think are actionable items people can take to address anti-Black racism in the workplace?
I'll go, Chris. So I have a few things. Again, I'm speaking as a voice of an ally, which I know these days is a bit of a loaded word. So I'm going to say supporter. So first, there's systemic and then some individual actions that a person can take in an organization. So in terms of systemic, we actually launched something recently at KPMG. It's basically a global jam where we're going to have courageous conversations across our global network of firms. And it's a 3-day event where we're listening, learning, and co-creating solutions to address racial injustice, particularly anti-Black racism. And I say systemic because this, we will look at our practices and policies and challenge them across the global network. So I think that's really cool, and definitely something I want to participate in as an employee to champion that. So that's what I can do. From an individual basis, if you want to be an ally, it's got to come from a place of humility, right? You've got to learn about the history and the root cause of anti-Black racism. Expand your network if you don't know any Black people. You know, some people don't know anybody, right? And that's part of the problem. So if you have Black colleagues in your organization, talk to them, ask them about how they experience the company, because it will probably be different from yours. And then with us, we just launched our Black Professionals Network earlier this year. And so I'm a supporter there. But if you don't have one, you know, can you help get that going from the ground up? A couple other things before I'm going to turn it over to Chris. Call out things, interrupt racist jokes at the boardroom, right? Call out unconscious bias during like a performance review, because again, you know, there's that culture, there's that fit that usually permeates those reviews, right? Support your Black colleagues to be recognized. You know, if somebody's at the boardroom and they're not talking, invite them into the conversation, give them your voice in order to uplift theirs. Nominate them for recognition at the firm. Be a mentor. You know, if that sort of thing is happening in your company, I know it is with us, particularly with our BPM network. And then lastly, like, use your skills. So for me, I'm primarily a marketing and communications person with subject matter expertise in social impact. And so, you know, whenever we have any campaigns on social media, I will amplify the voices of our Black professionals. Right now, we actually have our Experiences Matter campaign. And I'm just sharing it with my network because I think education is the first thing.
Thank you. I agree with everything you said. And just to continue off of that, so I do, from the individual standpoint, I stand with you on that. The number one is being able to speak up. I mean, in this day and age, that's what needs to happen. I think just bluntly, it's as an individual, you're seeing stuff too that maybe off, or you're not warning, or it needs to be touched on. You need to speak up. It's not a time to be silenced anymore. As we were saying the word ally, supporter, and it can be inactive, where, you know, you might come and talk to somebody on the side and say, oh, or you go home and say, oh my gosh, that happened today. But now is the era. Now is the time where we need to be speaking up, bringing it forward. Going further than that, in terms of the actual managerial staff or the employer itself, creating the spaces for these dialogues and making sure, you know, the work I do is often look at the policies and open it up to see, is there a D&I committee, or how are they working? What topics are they attacking? But it goes even further than that by having spaces for, how do you develop spaces for safe conversation for this to happen. Caroline spoke about experiences. Experiences are so important. So what you can do is learn about these experiences. Don't learn about it by trying to dig things out of people, but ask if they want to share their experiences. How do they want to share it? Maybe it's one-on-one. Maybe they do want to educate the larger staff audience on what's going on, obviously in a professional manner, and whatever policies have in place or whatever structures you have in place to do it. But are you making space for that? We often hear about, again, I always point to, because a lot of employers talk about understanding the staff, the employment, and this culture and things like that. How are you actually exemplifying that when you have Black bodies in that place that are going through particular experiences that either are causing them not to be able to move forward or feel comfortable in that space? How's that being expressed? So I think it's very important that those spaces are touched, are talked about, or are addressed. And then finally, with leadership, leadership needs to take the lead. I think it has to start. It has to have leadership. I often hear people say it starts with leadership. It should. It doesn't always start with there. Sometimes it's the staff bringing it up and putting pressure on leadership to start this up. But it should start with leadership, and leadership must take lead. They must take lead, noticing that these changes need to happen. But I just like to shift it, that it's not always a leadership that often takes it. The staff and all you as a coming together have to push that forward and bring that up to make sure it is being addressed. So I think a combination of all those, and I don't want to go over what Caroline said, so all those are great points.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think there was so many great things there. You know, looking at the fact that this is not just an organization's work, it's our work as well, and we have to take ownership over that. I really love that piece around creating space. You know, you need to create space for people to shine. People have the talent, people have the skill sets, they just need the opportunity. So there is something about how you step out of the way and make sure that other people have space to even talk in meetings or just show up. And I love that point. So thank you so much. On the back of that, what are other things that organizations should consider when wanting to address anti-Black racism? And I'll throw that to Andrea and to Aziz. What are some of the things that you think organizations should consider?
Well, I'll say there's two really important things that I think need to happen right off the bat. You need total buy-in throughout the entire organization, but it has to start at the top. It has to work its way down through the organization. I find what a lot of organizations do is they're just worried about the frontline staff or the customer-facing staff. It's top down. If you don't get buy-in from the people at the very top, and I mean like your board of directors, your C-suite, the chairman, the CEO, all the way down, you're going to run into obstacles. The second thing is, along those same lines, it has to permeate throughout the entire organization. So not just your employees, but also look at your supply chain and procurement. Who are you buying your products from? Who are your suppliers? Who are your vendors? Are you being intentional? Are you looking for companies that are run by Black people or run by people of other ethnicities? Or are you always doing the same old, same old? Black people are in every facet of your business. We are your customers. We are, you should be marketing to us. We should be in your marketing department. We are your vendors and we are your suppliers. So I think it needs to be pervasive throughout the organization and total buy-in across the board.
Yeah, I completely agree with those. And one other thing that, I think a lot of organizations need to start doing that they probably haven't is actually collecting race-based data on their employees, particularly all the federally regulated institutions, banks, insurance companies, even within the government itself. If you don't measure something, you can't manage it, right? And a lot of the times we see organizations hide behind the large group of visible minorities, like, hey, we're doing great. We've hired, 20% more visible minorities. But then when you disaggregate that data, you'll find a very appalling percentage that's Black, an even more appalling percentage that's Black women. And, I think that once organizations actually start collecting this type of data, then they'll be able to see whether they're actually doing a good job. And then they can actually put proper strategies towards either rectifying or improving those areas. A lot of organizations, like everyone, since the focus has been on diversity and inclusion, every company has jumped on that bandwagon and publishing one stat or another that makes them look good and makes them, makes it look like they're achieving some kind of diversity and inclusion mandate. But the problem is that it's been subjective. One organization can say that, oh, we're great on D&I because we're hiring more women. Another will say we're hiring or we're promoting more visible minorities. But again, what's the lowest common denominator in that? Have we gone down to the roots to say, okay, yes, for the group that says, yeah, we've hired more women, have you hired more Black women? And there's also a business sense to all of this, right? So let's take, for example, like within the industry that I'm in, we've got capital markets, we've got wealth management, and I'll focus on wealth management for a minute. If, we traditionally, and we're seeing that more people that deal with frontline facing individuals within the financial services sector are generally more comfortable dealing with people that look like them. So in wealth management and even in retail banking, if you have more Black employees on the front line, someone that actually understands the lived experience, someone that understands that, Black folks are more likely to get turned down for a loan just because of even the postal code that they live in. Not necessarily that the business plan is terrible, but there's, all these systems that have built in risk mitigations that that disproportionately affect Black folks. But someone that is Black that understands this can advocate, through the credit adjudication process to say, hey, I know our systems look at these factors, but here's something that our systems don't have. And then you look at also wealth management, right? We're seeing a transition, generally speaking, for wealth managers and asset managers, hiring more female wealth managers because the transfer of wealth is moving towards female demographic, and more women are look to invest in organizations or would like to speak with another female asset manager because there's an understanding there. That same strategy also needs to apply to the Black community. Hiring more Black wealth managers who actually know where the wealth is within the Black community, which might be different from what traditional approaches and strategies within financial institutions might dictate. Yeah, you might say that, oh yeah, we run this wealth management group, but we only know 5 wealthy Black people. Well, how are you measuring that, right? Yeah, you might know the popular names, but you may not know the intricacies of the Black community that a Black wealth manager might be able to understand. So organizations really need to actually put, data behind things, and then concrete strategies that also have a business lens to it. Because yes, I mean, companies are they exist to maximize shareholder return. Black folks are also shareholders in these companies. So there's an incentive for the companies to do well from a business standpoint. And if companies don't start looking at the Black community as an economically viable group that can translate into dollars and cents, then you're missing out on a whole chunk of the economy, and that can do a disservice in the long run.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that. So many really important points around, having a diverse leadership, having a diverse board, race-based data. That's super really important. Something that, Andrea, that you mentioned was around procurement. I think that also is really important, thinking about how we're sourcing our goods and services outside of our organization. Ryerson had that discussion at a former Investing in Inclusion about a year ago, and we found that many of our employer partners didn't actually even know what that was. And so for all those on the call, I encourage you to connect with our speakers to learn more about that, because that is a really, really important way of being able to support Black and Indigenous communities. So something for you to consider. Talking a lot about leadership, that's really important. You can't do this work without the buy-in of your leaders. And so I'm going to ask Carolyn and Aziz, how do we get leadership on board and to buy into this? And how do you respond to questions about why we focus on anti-Black racism specifically versus just diversity and inclusion more broadly?
Yeah, I'll start quickly. So I would say that the uncomfortable conversations or that buy-in stage happened at our firm probably about 6 or 7 years ago when we embarked on the IND strategy. So it really paves the way with respect to discussions today on anti-Black racism. But on top of that, I mean, we have been providing training for our leaders throughout the years, but there's also another one coming up, particularly for anti-Black racism, just to again, continue that education piece. So I'm in the social impact side and not in all the conversations on IND, but I do understand that this has been a real learning for us as well. Right. And I think a lot of organizations are doing this in real time and figuring it out with the Black professionals in their firms. But very early days, like we made sure that our leaders knew about cultural competence and all that, just to kind of pave the way. I'm going to touch on what Andrea was saying, because absolutely the accountability has to be on leadership. Because if you're putting together the plan and you're giving it to them in a silo, like you're going to run into obstacles, as she was saying. So the leadership really needs to set the tone, leadership and the board, in terms of what the organization is going to be about. And then why focus on anti-Black racism? I mean, an organization that's asking that has not been paying attention, right? I mean, the world is transfixed. I mean, everybody cares about this and is doing something about it in every level of society. But again, in terms from a business perspective, like they can look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, where they're telling you that ethics is the key driver for trust. And people really need to trust the organizations that they buy from, that they will join up to, and all this kind of stuff, right? And again, sort of that old but true adage about, the more diverse and inclusive your workforce, the more innovation you're going to have. the more competitive it will be, because you will have a lot of different perspectives. And particularly with young folks today, that's what they're looking for. So if you're trying to recruit top talent, you absolutely need to be on board in terms of social equity and social justice, the environment, all that kind of stuff. It's all kind of part and parcel of that.
Yeah, I fully agree with those. You know, this is a very, very interesting time. And, you know, there's I guess a blessing and a curse with this pandemic that's going on. You know, what it's brought to the table is that there's no distractions in terms of focusing on the issues that are affecting Black people right now. You know, the whole world saw the George Floyd situation. And that has cascaded beyond just the police brutality to focusing on what organizations have or haven't done to support the Black community, or how they've been complicit in systemic racism. You know, I'll answer the second question first in terms of why focus on it. One, because I don't think many people have a choice anymore, right? And also, you know, it also makes business sense to do so. You know, there were situations just on the other side of the border where I believe it was Taco Bell that, you know, almost got canceled by the entire Black community in the U.S. because one franchisee refused to let their workers wear a shirt that said, you know, a mask that said Black Lives Matter on it. And, you know, for something like this, it shows the power of the Black consumer, that, you know, literally a tweet shared, you know, on you know, Black Twitter, if you will, could almost have, you know, reduced a significant chunk of earnings for Taco Bell. So like I said, it makes business sense to actually pay attention to this. Otherwise, you risk alienating an entire crop of people with buying power. Just yesterday, I read an article about a lady who started a movement to get people to spend in Black businesses, and they were able to spend, you know, she got a group of people to spend over $5 million in Black businesses just in 10 days, right? So think about that buying power that could be within your organization, but might go away because you've chosen to either stay silent, or you've chosen to not pay attention to issues related to anti-Black racism. You know, there's a real bottom line impact that organizations could have these days. And the change, of course, starts from leadership. Over the last few weeks, we've seen a lot of companies come out with their solidarity, you know, messages, you know, the platitudes and things of that nature. Beyond that, you know, there have to be concrete steps. And in Canada, we've seen that come out, you know, over time. Some companies started with soft messages and then followed it up with more action and deeper action. You know, more money is being poured out, or, you know, funds that seem to have just appeared, you know, to support a lot of Black organizations and Black initiatives, because I think leaders now recognize that they cannot sit on the sidelines because they'll either get punished in the stock market, or get punished, you know, if they're private companies, they'll get punished in terms of buying power from a very, very strong and very, very highly economically sound community. So I would say to leaders, and if there are any leaders within this that are attending, you know, pay attention to what's going on within your organization. Pay attention to the voices of the Black individuals within your organization. Also pay attention to, you know, try and understand the pulse of what's not being said. A lot of Black folks within companies suffer in silence, you know. One, because, you know, some of us sometimes don't feel that there's psychological safety for us to express how we feel about a wrong, a clear issue that has come about. So creating those safe spaces to air out feelings. Black people are not asking for handouts. You know, no one's asking that, oh, you know, we've been mistreated and now you owe us something, right? That's not the issue at all. It is more about, I've been hurt. I just want to be able to speak out. And I hope that, you know, these companies or a company, or let's say the company that you're in, is hearing and is helping to create that safer environment. So I do applaud a lot of the CEOs that have stepped up to the plate. There are a lot of initiatives that are rolling out that I know CEOs are signing on to. One of them is the Black North Initiative that's being championed by Wes Hall. There's the Black Opportunity Fund that Dennis Mitchell and Ray Williams are co-leading. And there's also, you know, Andrew's organization, the Black Chamber, that is pushing for access for Black entrepreneurs, Black vendors into the corporate space in Canada. So if you're looking for resources, you know, there's a lot available. Companies can't make the excuse anymore, say, oh, I don't know where to find Black talent, you know, or I don't know where to find Black vendors, right? CAUFP exists. The Black Chamber exists. You know, the Black Physicians Association there's a ton of them. You know, if you don't know where to find it, just ask me. Just ping me on LinkedIn. I'll be more than happy to help out. But you know, we all need to be committed to that change and also approach it with a lens of understanding. Right now, the focus is on the Black community. Tomorrow, it might be on another ethnic group. So we all have to have that spirit of understanding that, you know, in this moment, we have to understand what Black folks are going through and figure out how we can help. Tomorrow, Black folks will have to understand and figure out how we can help whichever ethnic minority or ethnic group is facing a challenge that has now come to the forefront.
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks for that, Aziz. You know, something you said really resonated with me around the psychological safety of Black employees and being able to feel comfortable to express what their experiences might be and ask for support or say what they need. And I think that's a really important piece to address. And with that, I actually leads really well into a question that came up from one of the audience members, which is, you know, how can organizations increase employees' comfort to self-identify and also to take it one step further to ask for support? And I also, before you answer that question, I just want to say for anyone who wants to ask any questions, we're going to move into the Q&A period now. So feel free to type in your questions and we'll try to get to them.
So I'll take that one. I think the first thing or a tangible thing that organizations can do is one, in your application forms, your online application forms, actually have a disaggregated option to actually choose and identify as Black. I find that a lot of institutions just, you know, again, aggregated under visible minority. So again, you're not tracking the data. And to the Black folks on the call, you know, it is crucial to actually do this. A lot of times, even in the Black community, there are folks that feel that, you know, even checking that box of just visible minority can be a significant disadvantage to getting hired or to getting promoted or something of the sort. I think that period of fear is gone. So be bold enough to just declare who you are. You know, you'll be found out anyway, right? It's either when someone calls you in for an interview, they'll see that you're Black, or they'll check you up on LinkedIn and they'll see that you're Black. So you might as well start right at the beginning. So organizations just need to change, you know, their HR systems to allow for this to happen. That way, you know, people can get through the process. They can feel confident about it. And companies can then start seeing, oh, you know, how many Black people have applied for roles in our organization, let's say over the last year, and how many of those translated into hires, and what was the gap? Why was there such a gap? And what can we do to either increase or close that gap?
And if I can add, I think it's really important to create a safe space. And I think that starts with language. So I'm glad that we're talking anti-Black racism, diversity, visible minority, other, like Black. It's important. Let's just use the words. Let's talk about Blackness. Let's talk about white privilege. Let's talk about racism. So I think companies' culture, getting used to the words, and it's okay. You know, sometimes people are apprehensive about calling me a Black woman. I'm a Black woman. That's what I call myself. I welcome you to call me that too. So just getting comfortable with the language, and then also representation. So even things like your marketing material and your recruiting guides and where you go to recruit. Your employers are watching, your consumers are watching, we're all watching. We see who are in the commercials that you're advertising, we're your consumer. We see who's in the commercials. We see what's on the images on the walls. We see all of the documents and the literature. We want to make sure that we're represented so that you create a safe space. We all know what happened with Colin Kaepernick. Someone stood up or, went on a knee, stood up for himself and the community, and we saw what happened. There is fear. Like, people are afraid of losing your job. You're going to go to HR, you're going to report that you've seen or witnessed some discrimination or experienced it personally. You're afraid you're going to lose your job. You have bills to pay, you have kids to take care of, family to take care of, whatever. So, it can be hard to step up and be bold. So we ask and encourage organizations to create a safe space for us to come to and have this conversation.
I'll just add to that. I agree. I think I agree with Andrea that the fear still exists there, and in terms of the spaces you need to create that, in terms of the company itself, taking the first lead, and like we talk about appreciating the diverse cultures, and are they taking the lead to do that? Like, appreciate to learn. Are they actually the leaders taking on themselves to learn about the cultures and what exists in the company? The kind of the question you're referring to is, how do we get others to feel safe or seeing that's being done? Well, take the first lead and show that you're trying to understand culture, you're trying to understand what's going on in the workplace. And as that is kind of being seen or witnessed by the staff, then they'll be able to say, okay, maybe I can be a little bit more vocal. Maybe I can speak up more freely. They should, but that's what happens in the workplace. Totally to Andrea, it's their livelihood. They want to express things, but at the end of the day, they need the paycheck. They need to do what they got to do. So as the company, and to Aziz's point, seeing what's going on in society right now, they should already be doing this. It should be evident that this is something important, but if it's not, it should be growing. And the last point I would just say on that is, when we were talking to, somebody brought up the next generation of workers, and CSR came up. And if you see the trends, so Working United Way, following the trends, it is, even before what happened in the recent type of weeks before this, the trend was that social responsibility or social justice has been on the incline for the younger generation. They're not just going to work at a workplace to work. They want to know, what are you advocating for? What are you putting your extra dollars for? What are you supporting in the community? They expect it. So as the next generation filters into the workforce, Black, for sure, we need to have Black people, but even other ethnic groups or other people, they're looking to see, what is this organization putting their power behind, their platform behind? What are they doing with that? And we see the trend more and more. Even United Way, it's good and bad thing at United Way. They want to know more where the dollar's going and how it's going and what initiative it's going to and where it's going. Gone are the days where it's just a donation and go. No, who's it going to? Are these the people that actually need it? So we see that upward trend. So it's very important as a part of a business strategy.
Amazing, thank you. I know we're getting a little close on time, so there's two questions I want to get to from our audience. The first one is a merge of two questions. And this question is an interesting one. It's around measurement. And so, the question is, how do we measure and track the impact of anti-Black racist actions on companies? And should all companies be elevated on their contributions, or evaluated rather, on their contributions to equity, or does the CEO own that accountability? And I think there's another piece around there around how do we define the goals for tackling anti-Black racism. So it's sort of a big question, but would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think I need to hear it again. Could you say it one more time?
Yes. So how do we measure and track the impact of anti-Black racist actions on a company? So if a company's not taking action, how do we measure that impact to show what that's doing to them? But then also, when we're starting to think about how to tackle anti-Black racism in the workplace, how do we start defining goals?
That's a tough one.
I'm going to start with the second question.
Yeah.
So in terms of goals, I think one of my colleagues mentioned earlier, so we need information. You can't measure or compare yourself. You need a baseline. So when I'm looking at goals, like as a part of the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce, when we poll survey hours, we're looking at contracts. who are you getting contracts with now that you did not get contracts before? So I think if you look at an organization, they can do the same thing. Who are our suppliers? Where do they come from? What do they look like? And then in terms of hiring, HR can give you all of this information. And you look at your staff and you look at your recruits. Where are you going to find new recruits? Are you going to the same place where the same types of people already are? Or are you exploring different post-secondary institutions or different parts of the community or different areas where you can find more Black people? So I think at the end of the quarter or end of the year, you should have a good sense when you look at the numbers in terms of what your employee base looks like, the applications, where they're coming in, where you've targeted, and when you look at your supply chain, who are your suppliers now? And also your board. What does your board look like after the 2-year or the 4-year term? Has that changed?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Andrea was saying. So for me, it's more the second question as well, and just coming from the perspective of, because you're measuring this throughout, how many of the Black people that you hired are still with you? So the retention thing, right? How many have been promoted? How many have been able to make it to leadership ranks? And again, these things don't happen in a year or two, but once you have that data when they're coming in, and then you can just overlay all the other stuff and measure it. So I think definitely from an employee perspective, there's that metric. But there's also quantifiable information, right? Qualitative. So like interviewing them, what's their experience like? Are there, what we do with our firm, we have like employee satisfaction surveys, if you will, right? And again, making sure it's segregated within, Black, as opposed to just the big visible minority thing. But just those kinds of measurements, I think. But I think when you're creating a plan, obviously, like, you just have to have those goals and those metrics right off the bat in terms of what you're going to be measuring again, so that you know what you're shooting for.
Yeah. I'll also add that it's important for organizations to be very specific and tactical in the things that they hope to do to address anti-Black racism. So I think a few weeks ago, McKinsey came out with like a 10-point agenda of exactly what they were going to be doing within their own organization. And it was very specific and measurable, just the same way, organizations set their strategic goals, setting SMART goals, right? Those specific, measurable, actionable, timely, and, you can get results from it. That's the same way organizations need to approach this. So if you say and publicly commit that, oh, I'm going to increase Black hiring by 30%, then you have to work backwards in terms of, okay, what are the systems, processes, tools, even people that are going to allow us and enable us to achieve that goal. If you x-ray your organization and say that, okay, we can't just do this out of the blue, we need to change a variety of things, then do the work to change those things so that you can actually meet that targeted objective. And as Caroline mentioned, right, it's not an overnight thing. So which means, again, you have to communicate with both your internal Black professionals and your community to say, here's where we are on this journey, right? We committed to this. This is the time frame that we're expecting to achieve this. Here's where we are, so that people, feel that, know that you're accountable to those objectives, and see that you're actually making progress. Right now, I don't think Black folks, particularly Black employees, are going to sit on the sidelines while their companies make these statements, and then internally they're not seeing any movement or any results, right? So there's the onus is on corporations and organizations to keep everyone in the loop. Otherwise, you'll be called out, right? I think we've reached that point in society where people that organizations that make statements and don't follow through, the internet never forgets, right? So the internet will remind you, even if your own employees don't remind you.
I think, a really good point there is what gets measured gets done, right? And I think that's super, super important to ensure that we're measuring, but we're also setting timelines that are actionable and reasonable. And something else that came up for me when you were saying that, Aziz, was, create space for people to actually do the work. There shouldn't be work that gets done off the side of someone's desk. It should be create the roles to make this a thing that actually gets to happen and executed in a way that is mindful of people's capacity. And I think that really feeds into that whole mental health piece as well. There are a few other questions that have come through the chat, but we are at the top of the hour, actually past it now. So I want to wrap up our call here. What I will do is forward those questions to our panelists and see if we can get them to submit a typed response to those questions in some way, and then send it back to you. I do want to note that, as we said prior to this, rather, that we are going to be sharing some resources with you after this call. What that will look like is it's going to be a document that that has a bunch of articles, it has videos and all kinds of things that we can or that you can use rather to further your learning, both personally and as an organization. There are also a number of Black charities and nonprofit organizations that are on there if you want to volunteer your time or financial resources to those organizations. As we mentioned as well, the Ryerson Career and Co-op Center is doing a lot of great work around equity, diversity, and inclusion. And if you want to have a talk about what we're doing and how we can support you, please do get in contact with us. My email address is there on this slide here. And for any general inquiries, if you want to connect with Ryerson students, we would love to have you on campus to hire some of our amazing, amazing talent on campus. We have lots of great contact with many of the equity groups on campus as well. So if you're doing programming specifically for equity groups, please do reach out to us. With that, I want to thank Chris, Aziz, Carolyn, and Andrea. I mean, this was a phenomenal conversation, and I think there's lots of fantastic information. I encourage all participants to connect with all of us via LinkedIn or email after this call, and look out for further communications from us. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.